Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're looking at a pretty startling account from inside a secure psychiatric facility. It's a story that really centers on one of the most paradoxical patients the narrator had ever encountered.
Okay, so let's just dive right into this. We're introduced to a figure whose nickname, Dämon, which is German for demon, wasn't just some random label. According to the source, it was basically his mission statement. From the moment he got there, he was this constant, restless force of disruption and, illegal business.
And this, right here, is the central mystery we're going to unpack today. This whole story forces you to question everything you think you know about intelligence, about the reliability of psychiatric diagnoses, and honestly, about whether the systems we designed to handle this stuff are effective at all.
So to really get a handle on Dämon's life inside the institution, we first have to take a look at the really turbulent path that led him there in the first place. The source material paints a pretty grim picture. I mean, you've got a childhood where getting food meant you had to successfully steal something. Then an adolescence just spent bouncing between foster families and even jails overseas. His return to Germany was just cynical and immediate, and it all came to a head with a series of incredibly violent offenses that finally landed him in the facility that the narrator calls the Black Site.
So you'd think Dämon's criminal career would end at the institution's gates, right? Nope. It just found a new, captive market. See, he didn't just exist within the system, he learned to master it from the inside out.
The account describes his methods as just shockingly methodical. He was like a patient predator. First, he'd run these little social engineering scams, offering to change a €50 bill just so he could see where another patient kept their money hidden. Then, he actually taught himself how to pick locks. And finally, when the coast was clear, he just systematically raided their rooms. This secure facility literally became his own personal hunting ground.
And he quickly became the kingpin of this whole illicit internal economy. He would prey on patients who were in financial trouble, buying their stuff for pennies and then reselling it at what the narrator calls black site exorbitant prices. He even had an inside man, a nurse, who was allegedly smuggling in drugs for him to sell, turning the whole ward into a marketplace. And of course, they'd split the profits.
So here's the crucial point. The very legal mechanism that was supposed to contain him, this indefinite psychiatric placement, it effectively gave him immunity. Any new crimes he committed inside just got dropped because, legally speaking, what else could they do to him? I mean, you can't really add 5 years to a life sentence, can you? And this just reinforced his belief that being a criminal wasn't just something he did, it was a lifestyle with zero consequences.
Okay, so all of this leads us right to the heart of the contradiction. How are we supposed to reconcile the cunning criminal mastermind we've just been talking about with the man's official medical and psychological profile?
On paper, his main diagnosis seemed to fit him like a glove: dissocial personality disorder. The narrator even says that people on the ward would joke that his picture should be printed right there in the textbook definition.
And this just brilliantly illustrates why. I mean, look at the criteria: a total lack of empathy, a disregard for rules, can't feel guilt, always blaming others. It basically reads like a biography of his actions, both outside and inside the institution. The clinical diagnosis and his actual life seem to match up perfectly.
But then, there's this. The one piece of data that makes absolutely none of it make any sense. An official IQ test done at the clinic came back with a score of just 45. A number that points to a medium-grade intellectual disability. A score, as the narrator points out, that's only slightly above what you might see attributed to a chimpanzee.
And here's the paradox, laid out in black and white. You have a man who couldn't read or write, but who could instinctively calculate profit margins. A man who is officially deemed intellectually disabled, but could come up with and execute these complex multi-stage criminal plots. A man who supposedly couldn't learn from experience, yet he was consistently outsmarting patients with IQs dozens of points higher than his own. It really makes you wonder, what even is intelligence if it can't be measured by our standard tools?
So after a decade of terrorizing the Black Site, a decade of being this living, breathing paradox of the institution, the story takes a final, almost unbelievable twist. A new psychological assessment was ordered. A fresh pair of eyes was brought in to reevaluate the case of the man everyone simply called Dämon.
And the conclusion was an absolute bombshell. After being held for a decade under a psychiatric order, this new expert declared that Dämon was not, and get this, had never been mentally ill. The narrator says this finding was just utterly incomprehensible to the people who had been watching him for years.
So, with the stroke of a pen, his entire legal status was turned on its head. His indefinite psychiatric placement, gone, voided. He was moved to a standard prison to serve a set amount of time for an assault, and for Damon, this was apparently a liberation. But prison, without the strange protections of the psych ward, became what he called another kind of hell, where his past victims and enemies were just waiting for him.
He did survive his prison sentence, but just barely, enduring repeated beatings. When he was released, he didn't find some new life or rehabilitation. The last anyone knew, he was living in a homeless shelter, right back on the margins of society, exactly where his whole journey began.
Damon's story leaves us with this final, kind of haunting question. It's a case that just slips through all the cracks of our neat little categories of medicine, of law, of morality. It challenges the variability of our institutions to define and ultimately to deal with a figure who was, in the end, simply Damon.